Shane Holland. I am the executive chairman of Slow Food in the UK. In addition to do that, one of the things that I do quite a lot of is I do quite a lot of work in cheese, and I write about cheese, I broadcast on cheese, I speak about cheese. In fact, I do things all cheese. So welcome to Shane's Curd Nerd Club, which is what I was originally going to call this session. But instead we've called it a tasting of English cheeses. But I don't know about you, Wendy, but I quite like being a curd nerd. Do you want to remember our Curd Nerd Club?
I think it's a wonderful name, and I'd love to be a member.
So Wendy's the founder member of my Curd Nerd Club, and I'm going to show you my cheese board, which we're going to have a little look at, and then we're going to lift it up, have a little look at me, and we'll talk first of all about how to taste cheese. In fact, how to taste any food. We're going to be really, really hands-on. If you've got any questions as you go along, please put something in the chat box, put it in the Q&A box. Wendy will get that, and then she'll either ask me as we go, or we'll do it at the end, however's appropriate. We're also going to be talking about some serving suggestions. I'm going to talk about wine, and I'll take any other questions as well. Wendy is also this huge font of knowledge on all things cheese. She runs a cheese guide herself. So if I don't know the answer, she will. And if she and I between us don't know the answer, no one knows the answer. So let us make a start. I'll give you a little look at my cheese board. It's very, very difficult doing these things on Zoom, because normally when we do these things at food festivals, we have mirrors. But what I've got here is I've got the 4 cheeses. I've got some grapes, some crackers, I've got some celery, some walnuts, and I've got some chocolate and some other things. We'll be talking about why I've got some of those slightly more strange things as well. What I thought it'd be really nice and fun just to see what a board looks like, because we actually eat with our eyes, and it's really, really important to have a pretty board, I think. So I've just got a regular old chopping board. I've got a cheese mat there. Now you can buy those online. They sound very, very posh, but you can buy those online. I'm not going to name the retailer, but you can guess which one it is. They're about £2 each, and they're made of water reeds, and they're stitched together, and they just make your cheese board look really, really great, make them look really professional. You can just wipe them down with a bit of white kitchen towel afterwards, and you can keep on reusing them. And they're really, really great for storing your cheeses on. The next thing is, if you haven't opened your cheese pack, please open it immediately. It comes in plastic. And the reason it's come in plastic is, of course, it had to be posted to you. Cheese really doesn't like plastic, neither does charcuterie. In fact, very few things like plastic. But because you need to get things out to you hygienically, they had to send it to you in plastic. So take your cheeses out if you haven't done so already. And the cheeses we're going to be looking at today are, we've got Quicke's extra mature cheddar. We've got a cheese called Beauvale, which is the blue one. We've got the Wrekin white, which is a wonderful cheese from Shropshire. And we've got an original Swaledale. Now, the cheese company that we have used to send them out have sent you a card. So this card here. And inside, they are very, very professional. They have put the shape of the cheeses. I don't know if you can see that. And inside your card, they've got the shape of the cheeses, so you know which of those cheeses are which. So we're going to start off with perhaps our most loved cheese in the UK, and that's the cheddar. And it's probably the most maligned cheese that we have as well. It's the cheese that most people think of as cheese. I do quite a lot of traveling, and you go to the United States and you say, can you name me a cheese? And they always talk about cheddar. They're of course lying, because their cheddar's Monterey Jack. Monterey Jack is neither cheddar nor cheese, but we go past that. But the cheese that most of us think of as being cheese is cheddar, and it's the one you see most in the supermarkets. Really interestingly, it was a very regional cheese until the Second World War. We didn't eat a great deal of cheddar outside the West Country. You would have found it in very specialised cheese shops. But it's the cheese which has probably been most industrially processed. And the reason for that is that cheddar cheese became the national cheese. So during the Second World War, we were hungry, we were starving. The U-boats cut off our food supply, and many of our cheeses across the UK are crumbly. And before the Second World War, most cheeses that we consumed in volume were crumbly. The most eaten cheese, believe it or not, was Lancashire in England. And Lancashire is really, really crumbly. And in wartime, if you were cutting that and your cheese crumbled and you were literally, I'm not saying throwing it away, but you couldn't do a great deal with it, that was a disaster. So they invented something called the national cheese. The idea was that was only going to last for wartime. They weren't going to keep it any longer. And the national cheese could be made very, very easily. It could be made very, very quickly. It didn't have much aging. So if you didn't have to age it very much, you could serve it very quickly. People could eat it very quickly. They made it in square blocks, so it was easy to transport. Most cheeses before then were round, and you don't get so many on your van or your lorry. So they made it in square blocks. The fact it didn't taste very much didn't matter because everyone was pretty much starving and were delighted to eat anything. So that was the national cheese. And the idea was the Ministry of Food made all other cheese making in the UK illegal. For example, Stilton didn't come back until 1954. So cheese making other than national cheese was illegal. Maybe if you were a farmer, you might have made your own cheese on your own farm and you'd have hidden that from the Ministry of Food inspectors. But the national cheese was there. That national cheese is still available in every single supermarket in the land. You can go to Tesco, Sainsbury's, Aldi, Lidl, or wherever you wish. And it's called supermarket block cheddar. So that is not really cheese. It's not really cheddar. It's the national cheese. And that was a cheese of necessity in wartime. God knows we're still eating it. But this little V-shaped piece here, this is real cheddar. Now this here is made by the Quicke company. And this is cloth-bound cheddar. Now, Quickes are a really, really fascinating company. They've been making cheese since 1540, so nearly 500 years. They're a product of the very first ever celebrity divorce. Henry VIII wanted to marry his next wife, and to do that, he had to dissolve the monasteries. And where Quickes are, they're down in South Devon, was all monastic lands. It was all owned by the monastery just outside of Exeter. And Henry VIII dissolved the monasteries and effectively gave that land or sold that land to his mates to give him some extra money to help pay for the wedding. Weddings were expensive back in 1540 as well. So he did that, and the land has been in the Quicke family ever since. So they've had it for nearly 500 years. There's 17 generations. Though they've been commercially making cheese only since the 1970s, they have been making cheddar there forever. Because, of course, cheese making would have been happening on the estate, it would have been happening in the family. And cheddar making has not particularly changed very much in 500 years. So this cheese is pretty much constant. I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to talk about that as well. So I am using my fingers. I want all of you to be using your fingers. So if you've got a knife and fork in your hand, if you really must use a knife and fork on your cheese, then do. But really touch your food, because if you touch your food, you get a sense of it and you can tell whether it's good and whether it's not. When I was a little boy, my mother always told me never to play with my food. And so therefore, ever since, I've always wanted to pick up whatever I've got and I pick it up, I feel it. Does it feel right? I pick it up, I smell it. What does it smell of? And does the texture feel good in my fingers? So please do not be shy. If there are more than one of you at home having the taste along, break it in half. You're not going to poison yourselves. You've got clean hands. We've all got washed hands at the moment because of coronavirus. Our hands are clean, and it's only your own fingers. So take some of this cheddar and have a bit of a smell of it and see if you can get an aroma coming off it. If you've only just taken it out of the plastic, you're probably not going to get much of an aroma. I took all this cheese out in the middle of the afternoon. Cheese likes being outside the fridge. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm getting quite a distinct aroma off this. If you can smell a particular aroma, let Wendy know, and Wendy will then shout out what you can smell. If anyone can smell aromas, is anyone coming in with any aroma, Wendy?
Not yet. Come on, folks.
I will put you all out of your misery. So Quicke smells of horseradish. So when I'm smelling this, I can smell this distinct note of horseradish. Working cheese in the way that Wendy and I do. Someone's smelling grass. You can smell grass there as well. Dry grass, yeah.
Yes, and spinach.
Yes.
The great thing is that there's no wrong answers in this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you would find those kind of green notes. You do smell grass, and the grass is coming from the milk from the South Devon Downs. But the real classic note that you find on Quicke is horseradish. And if you work professionally in cheese in the way that Wendy and I do, you can pick up a cheese, and it's very difficult to judge them really fairly because you can tell what they are just by their aroma very often. So if we think of the cloth-bound cheddars, which is the traditionally made cheddars, they all have a very distinct aroma, and the distinct aroma of Quicke is they all smell of fresh grated horseradish root. And if you take a cheese like Montgomery's cheddar, which is another excellent cheddar, it's about 60 miles away from Quicke's, that smells of mushroom risotto. So you can pick up both cheeses and you can mix them up and you can smell the rind and say that one there is definitely Montgomery's because that smells of mushroom risotto, and this one here, lo and behold, smells of horseradish. Now, where does that aroma come from? Why does any of that matter? Well, these cheeses are real cheeses. This is about as far away from a industrial cheese as, I don't know, some vegan cheese replacement. I mean, this is a real cheese. And those aromas and those flavors come from the aging room. And inside an aging room, some of you will have visited a winery or a barrel house or a cognac house or a distillery. And when you go inside those barrel houses or distilleries, you look up into the ceiling and you see black mold everywhere. And that black mold is a mold which is related to something called the angel share. Many of us have heard of that. Well, in cheese making, you get something called the dairy maid share. Very sexist, but there we go. And in there, what you're seeing is molds all over the walls and in the roof inside the aging room. That is not something to be scared of. If you see an aging room which is full of stainless steel, please don't buy their cheese. It will have no flavour. And the reason for that is all these beautiful molds which are on the walls, on the ceiling, just like in the barrel houses, are the things that are giving all the flavour. They do it ethereally. It's completely by magic. And what's happening is as the cheese is aging, what's happening is the water is evaporating off the cheese. It's just like making a Scotch whiskey, and the water's coming out, and all of those molds which are on the roof, on the ceiling, on the walls, are by magic putting out spores and other aroma flavors, and that is what's giving the flavor to the cheese. Now, those molds, it's really important to say, are not touching the cheese. Sometimes we get very, very worried about mold, and we'll talk about mold a little bit later about when we see mold on cheese. But if we see the mold, on the walls, we think, is it going to be safe? They tend to store the cheese on wooden slats. Those are completely clean. The environmental health officers would not allow moldy cheese slats, but the mold on the walls is perfectly okay. And I was involved in an experiment actually with Quicke's about 2.5 years ago now, whereby we took a cheese from Quicke's farm, and we took two cheeses actually from Montgomery's, and we swapped them over in their aging rooms. And we knew that actually the aging rooms had a real powerful effect on the flavour of cheese. So when we went to taste those different cheeses, we tasted the cheese which had gone to Montgomery's but had been made in Quicke's, and we knew it wouldn't probably taste like Mary Quicke's classic cheddar, the one that we've got here in our hands now. We thought it would taste like Montgomery's, and we tasted it, and lo and behold, it didn't taste like Quicke's, but neither did it taste like Montgomery's. And then we went back to Quicke's and we tasted the Montgomery's at Quicke's, and we knew it wasn't going to taste like Montgomery's because it hadn't been aged in the Montgomery's room, but it didn't taste like Quicke's. And the reason for that is the milk and the terroir, and cheese has terroir, matter, but so does that aging room. And rather naughtily, James Montgomery, what he did is he actually took a cheese which he'd made on his farm, took it to Quicke's. The topography is very similar. They're very, very close together in distance. The soil is very similar. The herd is very similar. And he took one of his cheeses, he aged it in the Mary Quicke's cheese room, and he then took it back. He claims he rescued that cheese. I think that's very mean. Mary Quicke is a wonderful woman. The cheese didn't need to be rescued, but he took it back from its holiday and continued the aging in his own aging room. And the curd nerds, and you're all curd nerds with me now, were very excited by this because we didn't know what this cheese was going to taste like. Was it going to taste like Quicke's? Was it going to taste like Montgomery's? This is a cheese which started in Montgomery's farm. It was aged in Quicke's and then finished in Montgomery's. What was this going to taste like? I was incredibly excited. I can tell that you there are excited as well with me, Wendy, and everyone at home, I'm sure, is equally excited because we all love cheese being curd nerds. It didn't taste like Quicke's, it didn't taste like Montgomery's, and it didn't taste like the Montgomery's had been swapped over. So what really does matter is terroir, where does it come from, the aging room, and how long it's been there. Now, that also has repercussions because if you're a small artisan cheesemaker, the kind of cheesemaker that Wendy and I are always talking about, saying, guys, what happens if you expand? What happens if you expand your cheese room? Well, of course, the airflow in your cheese room changes. If you put an extension on, then the water vapor changes. If you put a mezzanine on, if you lift your roof, then the air currents will change. That then affects the mold in your cheese room, and your cheeses will change flavour. And we see this also in the whiskey business. I'm not here really talking about drinks today, though we're going to talk about some accompaniments. But actually, there is a wonderful whiskey called Lefroy, which you will either love or absolutely detest. I happen to love it. It tastes like TCP. If TCP rocks your boat like mine, drink it. It's really, really pungent. If you don't like those medicinal notes, skip it. You will really not like it. But the point of Lefroy is the barrel houses are down literally on the beach. They're literally washed by sea spray. And there is a particular barrel house which makes particularly fine Lefroy. In fact, so fine they charge you about 5 times as much. It is made in exactly the same way. It's the same water, the same still, the same everything, except the barrel house is next door to all the other barrel houses. That company is owned by Pernod Ricard, who are a multi-billion pound company. Multi-billion euro company, I should say, and they have desperately tried to replicate what it is about that barrel house that makes that whiskey in that barrel house, and it's identical to the other whiskies, taste even more delicious. They have built endless different barrel houses next door, trying to replicate it. They still cannot do it, and it is all down to the mold and the bacteria. So please do not fear mold, do not fear bacteria. I've been speaking an awful long time. We've not even tasted the cheese. Let's put some in our mouth. Using our fingers. It is absolutely delicious. I'm tasting hay. I'm tasting butter. I'm tasting brothy. Now, brothy is a great word, isn't it, Wendy? Brothy is what we talk about in cheese making and cheese judging. And it just means savoury. It means umami. It tastes slightly marmitey. And I am tasting these kind of savoury, grassy, hay-like notes, and all of that together we call brothy. And actually, whoever was talking about spinach earlier, and someone did mention spinach, I didn't say to you that I didn't think there was going to be spinach in there. I'm tasting spinach. Now, spinach is not a classic note in Quickes, but these are real raw milk. This one is a raw milk cheese. So you do sometimes get these notes. So whatever the cows have been eating, you get these different flavors. So whoever smelt spinach has got a great palate. You can join Wendy and I in professionally judging cheese, because that's kind of a strange note. I wasn't going to say you were wrong, because as Wendy said, there are no right and wrong. There is kind of a spinach vegetal note in there. So someone's flashing something up there. Someone's woo woo. Yeah, woo woo. This cheese I think is really, really delicious. Sorry?
How mature is that one, Shane? How long has that been?
It's 18 months. And that's a really great point as well, Wendy, because again, sometimes when we're thinking about cheese, we worry about the length of time, or we taste a cheese and it tastes very, very different, because this is our oldest cheese, 18 months old. If I were to buy this cheese and leave it in my fridge for 2 weeks, it's not going to affect the flavour profile at all. It's already 18 months old. We can buy cheeses which, Cheddar's maybe 3 years old. If we're buying a Parmesan, it can be 5, 6 years old. If it's in our fridge for 2 weeks, it's not going to make the slightest bit of difference. We're going to taste some cheeses in a moment which are 4 weeks old, 6 weeks old. So if we imagine that actually we've got it in the fridge for 2 weeks, even though it's cold and it's not going to age as quickly as it would in an aging room because our fridges are very cold, it is going to change the flavour quite considerably, because if I'm only 4 weeks old and I get another 2 weeks, I've aged another 50%, albeit more slowly than an aging room. 2 weeks on this, not going to make the slightest bit of difference. It's already 18 months old. Yes, it's very, very slightly going to change its composition, but not very much. I'm going to finish it up with this. Have a slurp of this. Some cider, which we had the other day. And we're going to next taste the Wrekin White. Now, this cheese here is really, really beautiful. So I'm just looking here. So the Wrekin is this one here. It's the one which is like a U-shaped. So this is a fairly new cheese. I'm just looking at my notes just to make sure that I give you the right information. So this cheese company was founded in 2005. Really young cheesemakers in Shropshire, named after the very famous hill there. And this cheese here, if we feel it, again, use our fingers, we can feel this cheese feels very, very slightly tacky to the touch. It feels almost like blue tack to the touch, actually, when I'm feeling this. Waxy is what we would say in the cheese world. But that's a good thing. And what we're actually feeling there is the water content, the moisture content in this cheese. And that's because this cheese is only 3 months old. So the difference, again, pick up, use our fingers, We've got the cheddar in this hand here. This feels really quite firm, really quite hard. It's got a bit of give to it. This one here is a bit more waxy to it, particularly in the heart of the cheese. And let's have a smell of this cheese.
It's quite white, Shane. Is that another cow's milk one?
It is a cow's milk cheese,
Yes.
yeah. So this is a cow's milk cheese. We would call this cheese, I guess, with the webcam, we're probably not seeing the best, but it's probably a pale lemon color, very pale lemon. But let's have a smell, particularly smell the rind of the cheese, and let's see if anyone can get those notes again. Does anyone get any?
I'm watching the box, folks.
Does anyone get any kind of nutty notes?
Farm and apple.
Yeah, farm, absolutely, and fruity. Yeah, exactly. So the kind of farmy notes are coming from those wonderful molds. That's a very, very typical note in cheese. So when we're professionally grading cheese, if you want to impress your friends, if you say the word barnyard in relation to cheese, you're almost always never wrong. You don't tend to find it in things like feta. You're saying barnyard with feta, your feta's gone off. But pretty much all other cheeses, if you say barnyard, you're never wrong. The reason we can smell kind of nutty notes, and maybe you've got some nutty notes on this cheese, is that it's wiped with rapeseed oil. And that's part of the aging process. So the cheese is young, it's only 3 months old, and they wipe it with rapeseed oil. And rapeseed oil, one of the classic kind of flavour profiles there is a nuttiness, and that's what you're picking up. Let's have a little taste of that. I've got a nice cheese knife here. Again, if you're at home, you want to have cheese parties and so forth, you can buy these wonderful sets, these ones here. I really like cheese, no surprise, so I bought these. These are the Languor ones. But this knife here is the knife that you want. This chopping knife here is for things like the cheddar. And this one here is for much more creamy kind of cheeses and also for pastes and so forth. So I'm going to have a little chop of this. Do eat the rind. People get very, very scared of rind. Again, I think the reason that we don't tend to eat the rinds is because we see mold. And if we see mold, then we panic. The only rind of a cheese that you shouldn't eat is Edam. If you're eating Edam, you can probably shut your browser. We probably don't have much to say to you on this course. But no, seriously, if you like Edam, it's a great cheese. Cook with it. I wouldn't eat it on a cheese board necessarily. But eat your rinds. The flavour is going to be concentrated there. And the reason the flavour is going to be concentrated, it's the one that's going to have most of the moisture that's come out. So if we look at our cheese, cheese ages from the outside in, so it is evaporating, so all the liquid is coming off here, and the very centre of the cheese, which is the heart of the cheese, is always more creamy, it's softer. In fact, it's what in years gone by, cheesemongers would take home for their own family. They would take the best bit home. That's called the heart of the cheese. And the reason that's creamier, as I say, it is the furthest away from the edge, and the cheese effectively is just dehydrating, and that's what cheese is. Cheese is dehydrated milk. It's milk which is losing liquid, just evaporating off. So I'm putting this cheese in here. Someone has put a question up, I think, Wendy.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm enjoying myself too much. It tastes a bit like Asiago. Now, I don't know whether it's because I'm a Scot, but I don't know what Asiago is. You'll have to explain to me, Shane.
It's an Italian cheese. Yeah, I think it does. I think it is. I mean, the texture is slightly waxy, slightly to the tooth. It's got a really nice nuttiness. I'm getting some nice kind of green notes in there, like green pepper, which again is another kind of common note that we taste. It's often in grass. And then the dry down is very slightly bitter. Now, on my accompaniments here, I've got some wonderful walnuts here, and walnuts go really, really well with cheese because of the slight bitterness. So I'm going to put a bit of walnut there and have that with my cheese.
So, Asiago, am I pronouncing that correctly? Is that from the north or the south of Italy? Or the middle?
Middle, I mean. You're putting me on the spot now. I'm going to hedge my bets and say middle. I'm trying to remember.
Maybe the person who asked the question can help me out there.
Come back to us on that. But it's delicious. Often we get asked about accompaniments and things as well. So I have got some pastes and other things here. So a classic paste here. I've got some damson paste, the Ark of Taste. So you think about the Shropshire prune. This cheese is from Shropshire. If I had some Shropshire prunes, I would cook those down, make some damson paste. I clearly was feeling very, very flush because I've got some Sauternes jelly here. But Sauternes jelly also works really well. Now, these kind of sweet kind of pastes work well because cheese is salty and our mouth is programmed to love sugar, salt, and fat in combination. And this is what cheese is. Cheese is fatty, it's salty. And if we add that sweetness, it kind of enhances all those flavors. So I know someone's just
Trentino and Veneto. Lovely part of the world. Thank you.
Very, very nice. So Christmas is coming up. We're all probably much staying at home a lot more at the moment. Some of us are going to have to stay at home even more. I mean, they're making an announcement as I'm speaking at the moment, so some of us are going to have to stay at home even more. Really great Christmas present is go and buy some Sauterne from the off license, so you can buy it in the supermarket. Cook your Sauterne down by half and add 2 or 3 sheets of leaf gelatin, and you can make homemade Sauterne jelly. I was feeling very flush. These things are very expensive to buy, so you can make your own Sauterne jelly at very, very little cost. And the sweetness marries with the saltiness and the fat of the cheese, and it's a really, really, really great accompaniment. So we really like that. Damson cheese, really, really delicious. Damson cheese is not a cheese. So the old-fashioned name for a hard fruit paste is cheese. That's confusing when you're talking about cheese because we traditionally eat these hard fruit pastes called cheeses with cheese. But yes, for this, as it's a Shropshire cheese, I would get some Shropshire prune damsons in the Ark of Taste, cook those down. You can find recipes online, or if you send an email to me to info@slowfood.org.uk, I'll send you a recipe and have that with your cheese. And fruit cheeses last forever and ever and ever. So let us next go on to the next cheese that we've got. And it's this one here. It's the other non-blue cheese we've got. I'll show you. Fingers to the touch on this one here. I think this feels almost like styrofoam. It feels like a very continental cheese. It feels like a Greek style cheese. It's got kind of an halloumi style texture to my fingers. Again, if you were using a knife and fork, you would lose all of that. And this kind of texture tells me something which is really, really important. It tells me this is a mixed milk cheese because that kind of squidgy, kind of styrofoamy kind of touch, that halloumi touch, means mixed milk because the proteins of the milk, they bind together and make this kind of stretchy kind of cheese. And this cheese here is actually one of our oldest cheeses to a continuous recipe in the UK. This cheese has been made in the same way for about 1,000 years. It's made in Swaledale. There is only one producer left of this, and it's a mixture of cow's milk, Swaledale sheep milk, and goat milk. And the first recipe is recorded more than 1,000 years ago. It originally originated in Normandy. It probably dates back even further. One of the great difficulties we have in the world of cheese is that today we think about regional cheeses. We've talked about Cheddar, we've talked about Swaledale cheese, and we can list lots and lots of different cheeses. But cheeses historically were cheese because cheese came from a particular area. I was speaking earlier that Cheddar was really in the southwest. If we had gone back 200 years ago, unless you lived in the very big house, the only cheese you would have ever have seen was Cheddar, and therefore that's what cheese was, and you wouldn't have known about any other cheeses. So if you were to ask for cheese, that's what you would have seen and that's what you'd have expected. If you went to Lancashire, then the cheese was Lancashire and it was completely crumbly. And if someone had shown you this strange Cheddar, you wouldn't have known what it was because Cheddar was something completely different. So the difficulty with that is in the writing of cheese. Whilst we have recorded history of different cheeses, it very often refers to cheese, and we don't have a clue of what cheese they're talking about. And this didn't really change until the 1700s with the introduction of Stilton. And we'll talk a little bit about Stilton and Stilton making in a bit, but Stilton is what's really given us regional cheeses in the way we have today, in the sense of being a concept. All these different cheeses all existed, but in the 1700s, the landlord of the Bell Inn in Cambridgeshire went on holiday. He was very wealthy. Landlords of pubs were very, very wealthy because he was on a staging route and he used to charge for the horses to be watered. He used to charge for the the men to be boarded and watered. The water had cholera, so everyone had to drink beer. So if you were a landlord, you were wealthy. And landlords of pubs were the second wealthiest people in the area after the local squire. So he had enough money to go on holiday, and he went on holiday 150 miles north. He went a great distance, didn't he? I mean, he wasn't going to Veneto or Venice, but he went north, and he went to the Beauvale Valley, where Stilton was being made, and he discovered this new cheese. And lo and behold, what he thought is, "Gosh, what is this? I don't know this is cheese." He brought it back to his pub. And because he had to sell that as something other than cheese, because the local cheese in his area was not Stilton, he named it after the town that he was in, which was Stilton. That's why Stilton is called Stilton. Stilton is not made in the what is now the town of Stilton. At the time, it was a village of Stilton. But that was the introduction of eating cheeses from outside your area. The town of Stilton is on the main staging route into London from East Anglia. East Anglia was the grain silo of London. They used to bring the grain from East Anglia into London, and what happened is the cheese at the Bell Inn became so popular that he started selling more and more of that than beer. He gave up selling beer. The cheese was made by this incredible woman called Mrs. Pusey. She was a real pioneer. She started the world's first co-op. When we went to school, we were told about the co-op pioneers, the Rochdale pioneers. They are officially the first co-op in the world. That is a lie. They were not. They were the first men to create a co-op. The first co-op was founded by women. They're erased from history, probably because they are women. Mrs. Pusey and her merry gang of farm wives were doing this 100 years before the Rochdale pioneers, and what they did is they banded together rather than selling their cheeses door to door, which was a great deal of effort because they all had 12, 15 children, and they had to make the cheese, and they had to keep the farm, and they had to do all the work and look after the animals, because the men just sat on the side watching the animals, and the women actually looked after them. So they got together and produced the cheese and sold it exclusively to the Bell Inn. So in doing so, they created the first co-op, and they created the first food distribution system, probably that we have around. It then started going into London, and there was a new cheese company called Paxton Whitfield, one of the oldest cheese companies in the world. They saw these new cheeses came in, and that is the origin of actually eating regional cheeses. Before then, you ate what was on your doorstep. But going back to Swaledale, because I have deviated slightly and I want to do that, this cheese has been made for about 1,000 years. We know that. Got a kind of a waxy kind of texture to it, styrofoam. Let's have a little taste of that. I'm using my little knife again. Use your fingers to pull it if you wish. Let's have a taste. This cheese is very young. I'm just double checking my notes, but I think this one here is 6 weeks. I'm just checking to see what the age of this one is. They can be as young as 4 weeks. It is white, it's very, very soft, very, very waxy, very, very kind of styrofoam. That's because there's lots of moisture in this. So let's have a little taste. Delicious. What I think this would be absolutely marvelous is if we could get some little baby new potatoes, melt this over the top, then that would be a supper, feast for a king. To make this milk, they get the milk, they heat it up to 28 Celsius, they hold it there for 2 hours, they then add the rennet, they keep it with the rennet at 28 Celsius for another 18 hours, so it's nearly an entire day. And then they lightly press it. They dip it in some salt brine, which again is quite common in cheese making, which is why again eating the rind is important. So you get the salt, you get the kind of balance with the cheese, and then depending on the outside temperature and the amount of water vapor in the air is how long they age that cheese for. So typically between 4 and 6 weeks. I'm just double checking how long this one was. It's 6 weeks. In the summer, because it's hotter outside, there's less water vapor around, therefore the cheeses emit more water vapor themselves. So the drier the air, the faster these cheeses release their own water vapor. So if we have a summer version, maybe only about 4 weeks. With these very young cheeses, you can taste the weather. So if it rains a lot, then we have the grass will go very quickly. Those of us who have gardens know that it's hot and wet. The grass goes very quickly. There's lots of sugars in the grass. And when we taste that, you'll taste the sugars in these very, very young cheeses. They'll taste sweeter. If you're tasting the cheddar, you won't really taste the weather. The reason being is those sugars are eaten. So the sugars that we're tasting are lactose. Now, some of us are lactose intolerant. In Northern Europe, we tend not to be. The rest of the world tends to be lactose intolerant. Countries which are, were founded, or shall we say colonized, I'll leave that to you to decide, by Northern Europeans, often can tolerate cheese. The interesting country, of course, is Italy, because Italy is a really, really interesting place, because in the north of Italy, they don't eat olive oil. They eat butter. They're a mountainous population, and they eat dairy. So in the north of Italy, they eat as much butter as we do. And in the north of Italy, they tend to tolerate lactose. And in the south of Italy, where they didn't have dairy, they have buffalo, but they don't have dairy as much. They tend to be lactose intolerant. So if you find some Italians, and if you ask whether or not they can eat cheese or not, you can find out roughly where in Italy they were without them even telling you. And the reason for that is in the summer in the south of Italy, it is far too hot for grass, and therefore cattle can't really survive. Buffalo can eat that forage, but it's one of the reasons there for you. So that is our Swaledale cheese. That cheese has been pretty much like this for 1,000 years, made in the same way. It has only got one producer left. If we do not eat these cheeses, they are gone forever. It is made in Swaledale, which is the most achingly beautiful part in the Yorkshire Dales. It rains ferociously for most of the year. It snows in the winter. It is one of the most inhospitable places, but for about 3 days in the summer, it is the most glorious place on earth. Do go and visit it and buy their cheese. So, just aware of the time, our last cheese is this one here. It's the blue cheese. Now, when you've unwrapped it, make sure you've taken all the paper off it. When I unwrapped mine earlier, I noticed that this cheese is quite moist, so the paper had absorbed moisture, so there's quite a bit of paper on it. This cheese here is called Beauvale. It's a creamy blue cheese, a really, really delicious cheese. And it's a very new cheese. It was invented in 2011, and it's effectively an English Gorgonzola. We can't call it Gorgonzola because Gorgonzola is protected, and rightly so. But it is a delicious cheese. It's made in the same way as Gorgonzola. The cheese itself is 6 weeks old. This cheese is actually pasteurized. It's the only pasteurized cheese we have. The reason being is it's coming from an area where there's a lot of TB around. TB is not good, so therefore they pasteurize it. They have to do so. And TB is a real issue within the UK, and certainly in large parts of the UK. And in areas where there is TB, they pasteurize the milk to make sure there is no TB around. Let's touch this cheese. It feels tacky to the touch. There's that moisture. We smell this cheese. It smells spicy, Wendy. I mean, when you get your pack, you're just going to love this.
This is torture, actually. I didn't get myself organized, but I will redeem myself.
Absolutely. It is really, you can tell it's going to be creamy. It has got a really light blue through. This cheese won best cheese in the World Cheese Awards. It won best cheese. It's won the Great Taste Awards. It's got 3 stars. This cheese has won every award you possibly can. I'm going to break this, but if you've got one of these fancy knives, you can use one of the fancy knives if you've got one. It's very, very tacky. Let's pop it in our mouth. It's creamy.
Which part of the country is that from again?
This is from Nottinghamshire.
Nottinghamshire.
It's made by the Cropwell Bishop Creamery. So they're famous for making Stilton. This is not a Stilton, but it's very, very creamy. I think this is superlative. I know in Slow Food, we kind of honor the traditions. We honor our heritage. We honor the 1,000-year-old cheese, but the 1,000-year-old cheese was new once as well. So we must remember that delicious things can also start now. I think this cheese is just beyond delicious.
And somebody says it smells like salumi.
It does. It really, really does. The kind of the rind has got that kind of intense aroma. It's very, very spicy. And what I like to do with this cheese is something slightly unconventional. I have got some chocolate here. This is 90% chocolate. So rather than having crackers, and we can have some crackers, and we'll talk about accompaniments in a moment, get a slab of chocolate. There are lots and lots of really good chocolates. This is 90% chocolate, so it's very bitter. And put a bit of cheese on your slab, like this, and rather than a cracker.
Decadent.
Mm.
I like it with fruit bread too, like a tea loaf.
Mm.
Cheese. I think that works rather nicely with the dried fruit.
Or one of your wee bannocks, which are actually in your pack.
Yes.
So chocolate works really well with these creamy blues. And in the past, I've made chocolate truffles. So switch out some of the butter. This is so creamy, so buttery. If you're making traditional truffles, take out 25% of the butter from the truffle recipe. Switch in 25% of this. And the cheese doesn't make the truffle taste spicy. It doesn't make it taste of cheese. It makes it taste savory and spicy, which is really delicious. So those are our cheeses. What else do we have on my magical board? Well, I've got some honey. Honey is great as well to go alongside cheese. I don't know of any cheese which isn't improved by a slick of honey. I've actually got some truffle honey here. If you are buying truffle honey, make sure it's got real truffle in it. Don't waste your money on buying things with truffle oil. Truffle oil is an artificial product almost always. There's a very large company called Ineos. They own the old BP refinery in Falkirk. And they have a specialty food division. As much as I love Scottish things, I don't want to be putting petrochemicals in my food. Unless you need a small mortgage to buy your truffle oil, it contains those kind of very nasty flavorings. So this is truffle honey, which had real truffle in it, absolutely delicious. We've got the different pastes. In terms of crackers, plain Carr's water biscuits, other brands are available as well, but make sure they're plain. You can buy them with, roasted tomatoes and herbs and cranberries and other things. If you like them, of course, please buy them. But my sense on kind of crackers is keep them plain, keep the flavors in the cheese. I think if you're having flavored crackers, you're just going to lose those flavors. It's a bit like, when people buy those flavored Stiltons at Christmas. And if you like them, then please do buy them. But generally, I like my cheese without bits in it, I have to say. And certainly don't buy those Christmas cheeses wrapped in wax. Wax and cheese hate each other because cheese is living. It needs to let off its water to continue to age. If you keep it in wax, then it's not going to be able to do that. As Wendy said, bread is delicious. I've got some great sourdough. So if you're putting your board together, think about something sweet, be it a damson paste, some honey, it could be some sauterne. Think about if you've got something blue, maybe some chocolate to go alongside that. I've got some walnuts, but you could have any other kind of nut that you like. I've got some wonderful plums here, some grapes. All those fruits add sweetness and acidity, so they're great as well. What do we drink alongside our cheese? I very often get asked that, and that's a really difficult one because we've all got such different palates. But there are a few things which universally go well with cheese. One of them is cider, and I've been having a little sip as we're going along. So this one here came from Sanford's. We have a Sanford cider tasting on Saturday, which is wonderful. The appleness there will go with all cheeses. That will work really well. If you don't drink alcohol at all, apple juice goes really well. If you're looking for wine and cheese matching is a whole different subject on its own, actually. And there are some superlative tastings. Most of us, though, can't afford or don't wish to buy 5 different wines for 5 different cheeses. So if you're wanting a universal wine to go with your cheese, it's the one which you probably don't think it is. Most people, when they think about cheese tasting, think about red wine. And red wine, if it's well matched with the cheese, will be the best match you've ever had. But a universal match is kind of buttery Chardonnay. Now, the reason that buttery Chardonnay works well with all cheeses is the butter notes really work with all cheese. The dairy flavors match. It will not be the best pairing you've ever had with any of the cheeses you've got. You won't have any of it and say, well, Shane, you recommended this, that was a great pairing. But what you won't have is a bad match with any of your cheeses, and that's the key thing. So if you can only have one bottle, then have that. Otherwise, other really nice things to have with cheese. We've got some port, of course. Now, port is a red wine, but why does it work? It's not because it's red, it's because it's really, really sweet. And the sugar and the salt in the cheese is what makes this work really, really well. So it's not because it's a red wine that this is so tasty with cheese, it's because it's sweet and it's the sugar, the salt and the fat. I've got some English cassis, same principle, sweet and fruity. And as we're coming up to Christmas, if we're feeling flush, this is an imperial champagne. Imperial means it's sweet. So a nice sweet champagne, same principle. If I'm on Christmas Day going to have a cheese board, I'm probably going to have that. And if anyone wanted Christmas pudding, you could also serve. Now, very, very quickly, because I'm going to have to wrap up soon, and some of you may have some questions. How do we store cheese? First of all, taking out any plastic that you have near you. Cheese is like us. We don't like being in plastic. If I was to wear an anorak and run around, I'll get very sweaty and very nasty. Cheese is the same. It doesn't like it. So not in plastic. If you're buying cheese in a store, a good cheese store, it will come wrapped in paper, in wax paper. Keep it in that. Wax paper is great. It allows the cheese to breathe. If you have bought cheese wrapped in plastic, maybe bought cheese from the supermarket or maybe online purchases, and it's had to come in plastic, take it out and tightly wrap it in greaseproof paper. Make sure it is tightly wrapped. If it is not tightly wrapped, your cheese will dry out and you'll text me and say, I've ruined your cheese. It must be tightly wrapped. Where do we keep it in the fridge? The best actually in your salad drawer. Now, salad drawers are really, really difficult because lots of us keep salad in our salad drawer, and lettuce and cucumber have lots and lots of water. That is not a good thing for cheese. Cheese does not like water. So throw your salad away. You don't need salad in your life. You do need cheese in your life. And keep your cheese in your salad drawer. I got divorced a number of years ago, so my cheese very much lives in my salad drawer. Salad does not need to be in the salad drawer.
The salad is better at the top of the fridge anyway because it's not as cold.
Yeah. So the next best place is actually in the top of the door. Wendy is a cheese expert as well, where your egg compartment is. In the United States, they wash eggs, and that's why there's an egg compartment in your fridge. You don't need to refrigerate eggs here in the UK because we don't wash eggs. Throw that egg thing away. You don't need it. And keep your cheese in that because it is the least cold place, as Wendy said, and it's its own little microclimate. If you've got a wine fridge or a beer fridge at home, they're even better because they're warmer than a domestic fridge. Domestic fridges are far too cold, really, for fridges. Traditionally, we used to keep these in pantries. I live in London now, but I grew up in Cornwall. In Cornwall, we all have pantries. Maybe you have a pantry at home. Here in London, pantries are second bedrooms, so we don't have them here. So I do have to keep my cheese in the fridge, but take it out. Do not panic. And then finally, just referring back to mold, and then we've probably got just 2 or 3 minutes for questions. Mold is absolutely fine. Do not be scared of mold. If you see a blue mold, it is always penicillin rock 40. It is the only blue mold which can tolerate being on cheese. It's exactly the same mold you'll see on Stilton. If you have a cheddar with some blue mold, lucky you, I'd pay a premium for that. The mold that you do need to worry about is the black mold. And if you store your cheese in the salad drawer with some lettuce, you're going to get black mold. And it's very easy to remember. Black is death, black death. Do not eat it. It won't kill you, but it will make your stomach upset. Those of us that have to do our kind of, sillet banging of our bathrooms down will sometimes very occasionally see a black mold in our bathrooms. The reason for that is that black mold likes fatty, salty, acidic products, exactly the same as our skin cells and shower gel. And the black mold that you sometimes see in your bathroom before you wash it down on a Saturday morning is exactly the same black mold you'll see on cheese if your cheese gets wet. It isn't going to kill you. It's really not pleasant. Don't eat that. But any other mold and cheese is pretty much okay. If your cheese feels slimy, throw it away. In fact, I would never have cheese long enough for it to go slimy. But I'm going to have to wrap up now, but we've probably got 2 or 3 minutes.
We have a couple of minutes. There hasn't been a question come in, but this is your big moment, folks. You'll have a couple of minutes if you have a question.
Or do ask Wendy. And as I say, you can also have a look at the Wendy's cheese guide via her website. Wendy, can you give us your website?
Thank you. It's scottishcheesetrail.com. And as the name suggests, it's above Hadrian's Wall. It's been fascinating to get to know the English ones. Can you recommend a good whiskey to go with cheese?
Yes, I really like Brookladdy with cheese, but again, I like those kind of pungent flavors. You might want to have something like a Balvenie, which is probably going to be more neutral. It's got a kind of a grainy flavor, almost like a cracker. So you're going to have kind of a cracker flavor, so a liquid cracker. That sounds a very nice thing to have with cheese.
And it does depend if you particularly like the Speyside malts,
yes,
or you prefer the peaty notes. There's a kind of, your own personal taste there as well. I think, again, like the wines, there isn't a right or wrong if it's what you love.
And if you're speaking to me, I'm always going to tell you lots and lots of flavour. So, I could suggest 21-year-old Lefroy. I'm the only one in the room that's going to want to drink and eat that. Anyone else that's got anything?
I'm typing in my website. Somebody says, amazed by the chocolate revelation. Will any chocolate do? I think the
Yes,
best
but
cocoa.
you need it to be at least 70% cocoa. The one I've got is 90%. If that worries you normally, do not worry, because the fat in the cheese is going to bring down the bitterness. If you were to put this with Cadbury's dairy milk, it is going to taste greasy and the chocolate's going to taste bad. Well, it doesn't taste great anyway, but the chocolate's going to taste particularly bad and the cheese is going to taste bad. So go for more cocoa content that you would normally tolerate.
With a really good snap.
Yeah, so at least 70%. But I mean, the brand that I'm using here now, and there are lots of different brands, it's Lin. You can buy that for about £1.50. This is not me suggesting something which is terribly expensive, and that will work really well for all kind of creamy blue cheeses.
Sounds delicious. Sounds really delicious. No other questions? Any last question coming in here?
No?
Well, I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone. That was absolutely fascinating. I loved it. And I could definitely talk cheese all night. So that was a lovely little soupçon of cheese there. Thank you so much, Shane.